Ready? Great. Hi, I'm Amy O'Hara. I'm a research professor in the Massive Data Institute at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. And I am the newest working group lead on this TRE-SD project, which is Trusted Research Environments for Sensitive Data. And I think that my other European collaborators and folks in the UK were excited to find someone in the US that was willing to talk about at least the capacity that we used to have, even if it is being somewhat dismantled now. Uh, we are all eager to have better sharing, secure sharing of research data. And so this working group has been focusing on a couple of different dimensions. Let me see if I can. There we go. The group started back in 2023, whenever there was this community consensus around the need to have more standards surrounding TREs. And they had a working group kickoff. There are three subgroups that I will explain in a moment. And then today, I kind of want to have a reality check because a lot has changed since this group was initially talking about this. And with the dramatic technology changes that are both enabling and somewhat threatening the way TREs operate, I think it's a great time to say where we're at as we are writing the recommendations that will be due later this calendar year. So that's kind of the framing. The group has participated in other RDA events, and it has been mostly a call for engagement. Are you working in a TRE? Are you interested in a TRE? Please come and talk to us. And then the working groups were exploring the needs and the standards that exist. And so part of the ongoing focus, as I mentioned a minute ago, is with these ongoing efforts in other parts of the world. And I am here, new, describing a bit of what's going on in the United States in our TRE/enclave ecosystem. And here I want to tee up the conversation about what we have at the federal level, which is the Federal Statistical Research Data Center Network. There are 34 labs around the country that plug into a trusted research environment. The Centers for Disease Control run a separate TRE for people doing health and health services research. But in the US, we don't have all of the efforts coming directly from the federal level. There's a lot of activity in the nonprofit, university, and even state and local space that I'm happy to talk about if there is interest. Many of these are domain specific. There will be TREs set up to facilitate cradle to career or education to workforce linkages. Some of them are human services linked to education or even to workforce. And so there is no uniform progress across the US. And as we are a collection of states, each doing their own thing. And so when my colleagues on the top half of the slide are saying we have this need for standardization, that is clearly proven when you look at what is happening across the US. There are also organizations that are using cloud service providers, and they are pitching their own clean room/TRE solutions. And that's something that I want to see if there is interest in more of a conversation here about that, because that is really something that has evolved just over the past couple of years. And the great work that my working group co-chairs have been doing on the architecture and the requirements for what a solid TRE would have, a lot of that is obscured whenever you're working with a vendor. They tell you what switches you can toggle in order to set up your TRE, but you don't necessarily have the transparency that you would if you were working with a government agency or a university partner that allowed you to see pretty much the requirements to the build through the testing and have a much better understanding of what's going on under the hood. So that's something that I think is worth talking about and the way that TREs exist in the different countries is something that we've been probing on, and I think that there's a huge opportunity to speak to those commonalities as well as those differences. Okay. As I alluded to before, there have been some major technology changes, and I've just put a couple of them here on the slide, but I'm eager to hear if there are tech shifts that you guys have seen affecting the development of enclave models or the way that they are operating or the way that they are going to need to change their governance and operations. One is that agentic AI is here. And so, whenever we think about the way that we would have considered that the diagram of who is in the trusted environment and who is outside, we always thought about that as a person on the outside. That is likely no longer the case, that there are going to be uh, scripts running so that agents are managing some of the data flows, some of the permissioning, perhaps some of the review about what is allowed to come out of a TRE. And this has enormous opportunity, but it also has a great deal of risk and a need for monitoring that I'm not sure that everybody knows how to do. And when we think about a lot of the models the TREs are following, it was developed prior to the age of agentic AI. And so, if you are going to have these agents accessing data, because many of us in the university setting, they're intrigued by what they could do having AI go and replicate a paper that they had already published, going out and seeking those data sources. How that intersects with a trusted research environment and its governance model that had been set up prior to that is something that we really need to be cognizant of and working on. And I don't think there's going to be a fix. I think that this is going to be an ongoing set of fixes. Related in the center here is Model Context Protocol. This is great. This is a standard for AI tools to go and work more efficiently. But again, a lot of these have been set up and they don't have the right security protocols in place. There's been recent analyses saying that, if you do a scan, you can find literally thousands of them that are not set up properly. If those get hooked up to your TRE, that is a recipe for disaster. And I'm not saying that we need to make sure that humans are doing it because humans are not infallible, but we need to be thinking of this in a way that I think the origin of this working group in 2023 didn't have to grapple with. Because while some of these uh, aspects were in development, they weren't on our desktops and often being pushed by our own organizations. Because I know that at least in the States, universities are like, here is your license, go forth, use AI. And they have some guardrails, but not necessarily when it comes to trusted research environments with sensitive data and what those interfaces will be someday. MCP could create new data exfiltration pathways, and that's something that we need to make sure that not just our governance, but our security, our monitoring, are keeping tabs on as we continue to embrace uh, greater access to data through these tools. And then finally, over here on the right, I mentioned this already. You've got the major cloud service providers offering TEEs, trusted execution environments for secure workloads. And those are a first cousin of TREs, or they are the same thing because there's a lot of confusion on terminal, like on vocabulary here. But those used to be almost out of reach for nonprofit organizations. And now the price has come down. There is still a cost premium relative to using just normal cloud service provider services, but the cost for using their confidential computing services is now within reach. And I'm wondering if some organizations that would have needed to build a TRE if it is now feasible for them to buy into one. And it isn't just limited to the ones that I have here on the slide. You've got Snowflake and others that offer clean rooms as well. And this doesn't negate the trust issues. Not that a traditional TRE did either, but you need to have confidence in that service that you're buying into. You have to understand the parameters that you can manipulate and make sure they align with your governance model. And then you just have to have faith that that's all working properly behind the scene. And that is something that you would also have to do if you were working like from building one from scratch. But these are being kind of marketed more aggressively. And I don't think that there is necessarily transparency about the way that they're set up. So I've been talking a lot and I want to have a conversation. And I want to know if what I've been talking about, is that ringing true in the work that you're doing or that you're familiar with?
So I just shared the so in the US, so NIH actually released a new security requirement for all the controlled access data repository. So it started with the, genomic data because that's what they care the most about. Human genomic data is mostly most sensitive information. So what they did was, you know, before they didn't have a guardrail uh, in the system they're downloading the data to. But
Hmm.
now they require like Enclave. Basically, it has to meet the NIST 800-171 security standard, which is the highest standard,
Yeah.
right? So that's considered, what you call maybe trusted research environment. There's a standard NIH is enforcing right now.
Hmm.
So not, it was a huge deal, went into effect January last year. So institution was scrambling to
Right.
meet the requirement. We fortunately had an Enclave, but it's really cumbersome to use. So they actually have a something called the Research Infrastructure, RIS, Infrastructure Storage Platform, but it wasn't quite ready. But they
Hmm.
gave us a grace period. So as long as you have a plan of, uh, it's called POEM, I think is a plan of actions
Hmm.
or something. I can't remember the acronym. Anyway, as long as you have a like action plan to meet the requirement, they actually allow us to use it. So actually they made that platform, which is very popular to all of the researchers at WashU, whether they work on genomics data or something else. So they meet the requirements. So that's a considered tray, I guess, trusted research environment, because that's where download the data from the control access repository and then process it. So because it meets the security standards set by NIH, NIST 800-171. Outside the US, it's called something else. It's ISO something, I can't remember the
Hmm.
name, but it's equivalent to NIST 800
Yep.
Maybe Lars will know. So so that's what, we're talking about. Hey, Patty joined us. Hi, Patty. Uh, here's something
Hi,
about, oh, okay,
Susan.
hello. Anyway, so I was just, talking about, so that's, as far as I know, that's what we call in trusted research environment, that meets
So
the, NIST 800-171.
the the security standards from NIST are for the storage of federal data. I used to be the executive at the Census Bureau that I probably should have done a bit of bio. Before joining Georgetown, I was a senior executive at the US Census Bureau and I ran their data linkage and curation unit. And so I was the signatory getting data from all of these different agencies. Uh, the standard that this working group has is about data visitation. It is where the data lives, say, at the CDC enclave, and people come and use it there without downloading the data to their own compute environment. There are a number of universities, like the University of Michigan has an enclave where they use data from the health and retirement study along with data from Social Security, linked to Social Security and tax data and a lot of health data. But they had built something that was robust and people could come and use the data in that environment.
Gotcha. So mostly about data visitation. So where
Yeah,
the data is stored, not necessarily where you will download the data into.
right.
So
And it
it
means
is,
that you have to support the compute. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
so a compute. So you need a platform where you can have the analytical tools there as well as the data set. So
Yeah,
like a data commons kind of thing.
yeah.
So I mean, it kind of fits into our theme, Lars and Patty from our AIDV work group. We talk about data visitation all the time with the secure environment. So maybe they can chime in.
Lars?
So yeah, in the I currently I'm very active in the RDA group that Seung and Patty is part of, which have been discussing this idea of data visitation for a long time. Um, for a bit of context, I could say that I raised the question about AI and this type of movement already in the first BOF meeting in 2023 for this group. So it's been around, but it's not maybe had a central part. And in many times this is because we've had to set up most of our TREs as the traditional silo
Right.
environments, and still this is still the way that we set them up. The concept of data visitation is still underutilized in many spaces, both in Europe and in uh, other parts of the world, as far as I
Everywhere.
know. The in We are currently in Europe. They're setting up a Euro HPC center for sensitive data and an AI factory part for sensitive data in Sweden. Uh, and this system would again still be somewhere where you would also bring your data with you,
Hmm.
because there will be maybe some data that will automatically be gathered in there, but most of the data would be brought in by the researcher themselves and then worked with on the systems. But in not traditionally data visitation in that you have, and I think this is because most repositories are not set up for compute.
Right.
They do not have the resources for compute. So you need to bring your data somewhere to where they specialized build the machines that are secure for compute. Um, and this is also what we see when we try to do sensitive data in environments that are not purposely built for that. We can see that that becomes a huge problem.
Hmm.
In the EU, I think we have a bit of an issue at the moment where a lot of development is happening, where the implementation of that of the laws that we have, because we now have quite strong laws both on the AI Act and in the GDPR. I think many systems in the current are kind of outrunning their pace of implementing uh, properly implementing those laws. So they're kind of rushing to build their systems, and in doing so, they're a little bit too far ahead. And then we end up in the situation where Seung was talking about, where it's like, oh, as long as you're working towards compliance, that's good. The problem with that is that when we're talking about this kind of systems and this kind of data, working towards compliance means that data is unprotected for a while. And I think that's a problem that we've not in the community taken serious enough,
Hmm.
because especially as we've talked about with agentic AI and agents, the rate at which these could harvest
Right.
from an open uh,
Word. Yep.
system is so fast. So, and once the data is out, it's out. We've lost the control, right?
Right.
So that is the biggest issue in the moment, is that we are allowing compliance, meaning that work towards compliance is considered compliance rather than actual compliance. And I think we need to be a bit stricter actually with trying to say that, hey, maybe it's better if it takes another month before we launch our system and we are actually in compliance than launching now and working towards getting it secure. The newer systems, I think, are more built this way, or at least some of the systems are built this way, but we still have a lot of gaps in the types of systems, I think, where we really don't have control over data for periods of time, and we give ourselves false reassurances in saying that we do have it. So yeah, that's my current take on these things at least. I think maybe Patty, who's in actually in the private sector, actually might have some quite interesting insights as well, in especially on the data visitation parts.
Yes, hi.
Hi.
Thank you, Lars. Yes, so we have a small business, Lifetime Omics, and we work on with data visiting, and I'm very much aware of the trusted research environments. And I also was a consultant for a bio team, and we work for NIH and pharma and universities and cancer centers, and we actually developed many trusted research environment where you could actually process the data. Now, having our own business, we are using agents in it. And to be quite honest, I do not trust access to the agents to any sensitive data. So what we're doing is we are not giving the raw data to agents. We are building digital twins that abstract the data, and that is what then we give to an agent that can then go in there and can run fantastic statistics on it, generate fabulous reports. It's quite fantastic. I mean, it knows obviously all kinds of statistics a statistician wouldn't even know, and it can do so safely on a digital twin, privacy-preserving digital twin data set that abstracts. We're working with healthcare data, so if you imagine that you have patients that received all these kinds of treatments, you can abstract at a higher level. You don't say what kind of drug exactly they use. You just say antibiotics or a higher level of everything, and maybe there was everything higher level, and you abstract it. So you also, so there's a lot to say. You prepare a model that's a digital twin that they can treat, but I don't have a solution to I don't know how it can work. I think it's a big conundrum, and allowing agent access to raw data, and that. So as I said, my only solution that we are working with on right now is digital twins, privacy preserving digital twins.
Thank you. Any other comments on this part of the call, please?
Yeah, I think one thing that we could think about when we're thinking about digital twins, we're thinking about these systems is either you can serve up a digital twin of your system on your system, or you could, as with this data visitation, right? You could bring everything, the agents inside, and control what the agents are allowed to give as output. So you would bring the entire agent system inside and let it operate inside the environment without access to sending out any data from your system. And then you could just control what the agent can then report back. And that way you would have a system which would enclose the agent inside the place of trust, and you would also have control over what data comes out, which means that you wouldn't see effects like persistent data leaking over in training. You wouldn't see these effects because it would all be inside of your of your
perimeter there.
environment.
Right.
That is correct. And Lars, that's absolutely correct. I forgot to say how they're doing it in the healthcare environment. Those are trusted research environments nowadays. All of these healthcare providers, they have a lot of data and they are using AI. And like Lars, just pointed out to it. So they actually are running their models internally. They have their own models. It's all on premise, and they're trying not to obviously have any connection to the outside. That's another way of doing it. It's the most expensive way to do it.
Right.
Running your own, large language model and so on is not so easy than just deploying one of those apps or running an API.
Mhm.
But yes, that's another solution.
But in terms of people needing to bring additional data, even to the healthcare setting, if I wanted to bring microdata from other social determinants of health, say I have data on evictions or I have data on incarceration, and I want to interact that, it used to be that it involved a tedious data sharing agreement process. Like it was handled by people and contract law. And now the opportunity is that much more of this could do with what we used to describe as smart contracts. But smart contracts were typically envisioned being administered by humans, not learning agents, and the degree of supervision, I think, is something that hasn't been discussed adequately, at least in the circles that I'm running in. Because I'm not sure people know how to monitor this.
So if I just might add again, one of the things that we proposed, this was we have an AI data visitation group. That was another session, was that there is also a great need to supervise the humans that are in the loop with the agents, and that they need a lot more training, because a lot of people, as you said, are very gung-ho about using AI, and I'm one of them. But because of my business, I have liabilities. I have to be and on one side, I want to compete, and on the other side, I'm worried about the risks. Many people are not worried about the risk. So there's really a need to train the humans that are going to be supervising the agents and understanding what the agents are capable of and how to set guardrails for them as the human supervisor. And there are, for if you're using some agents, there are some rules and features that you can enable or disable. And so there is a need to take the time to not just jump to using them, but actually learn of these features where you allow them or disallow them access. Yeah, so that's policy and ethics.
I probably work with an equal number of people that are very gung-ho and people that are absolutely anti-AI, because I work in the population measurement space with a lot of civil rights organizations. And when you talk to them about AI and having guardrails and transparency, they point to the front page of a newspaper and they say, there are laws on the book that are supposed to constrain data sharing and have transparency. And we're in a political moment where that is being ignored. And so ramping it up with AI just seems ill-advised. So there are people that are just really contracting and being almost there's no way to convince them of the opportunity or of potential benefit, because to them the harms so outweigh the potential benefit. It's an interesting time. I did have these questions. Is anyone here working in an enclave or TRE environment these days? Thank you, Lars.
Oh, Kelsey.
Would you like to, Kelsey, would you like to speak to that if you won't mind?
Yeah, I can speak to that. And hi, Sun Young. Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Let me lower my hand. I am in the libraries at Ohio State, based in the US as well. And actually, Amy, I was at the inaugural Administrative Data Research Conference last summer at Georgetown.
Yay!
Yes, thank you for hosting that. It was a great event.
We'll have
And
another
so-
one next year. Everyone should come because we talk
Yes.
about these issues like nerds. So
Yes. And so the library is not the one who operates the TRE at Ohio State, but we do work very closely with one of our research centers that has a lot of expertise in data security. Amy, my guess is you probably know some folks associated with CHRR or the Ohio Longitudinal Data Archive. So for the past about 3 years now, the libraries at Ohio State have been collaborating with this research center, CHRR, to extend their existing Enclave service into a controlled access data repository.
Okay.
And so I am less involved in the operations of their TRE, which were already fairly well established, and more involved in helping them think through what the relationship is between a secure research environment and a controlled access data repository, and how to make those two services play well together, and how to do a little bit more capacity building within the larger repository ecosystem to support more development of controlled access data repositories. Sun Young was talking a little bit earlier about some of the policy development coming out of the National Institutes of Health in the US. And another draft policy there has to do with controlled access data repositories. And certainly we saw after updated data sharing policies coming out of the NIH that there's a real gap in that controlled access in supporting public access to data when that data is sensitive. So there's both the, how do you work with sensitive data and these questions of data visitation, who has the data, but there's real gaps and real challenges as well in that side of, well, who does have the data?
Mhm.
When we're talking about situations like the Federal Statistical Research Data Centers, which Ohio State finally has a site as well, we're one of the newer members. It's obvious who the data owner is there, right? Because it's the federal agencies themselves. But when we look at the research data ecosystem, it's a lot more complicated to support research data sharing across a variety of disciplinary contexts, not all of which have domain repositories that can support controlled access. Because historically, that controlled access repository function has really been within disciplinary communities. And the generalist repositories that support broad open access data sharing when there's not a disciplinary repository are really ill-equipped to meet the needs for controlled access when more sensitive data sharing is needed. So my interests are a little bit further afield of the TRE piece, but I think there is a real need for sensitive data solutions to be working kind of across the entire data lifecycle. So I'm interested in that sharing piece, which of course, again, is connected.
Great. Thank you. Sun Young?
Yeah, I want to add a little bit. I just shared the enclave we have. That's mostly for controlled unclassified information.
Mhm.
But WashU has also institutional data repository, which is a generalist repository, but it's very unique in the sense that we offer both open and restricted access.
Mhm.
So what it does is we don't allow analytical tool to come and do the analysis. It's mostly the preservation archiving system, but we lock them behind the wall. So it requires data transfer user agreement, which has to be signed by institutions. So it's definitely human, manual process and huge barrier. So people get frustrated. I mean, less than 30% will actually go through the process and access the data. So that's the main reason I got interested in data visitation. How can we lower the barrier, of this highly sensitive data? So it allow researchers to access this data and then further the research. And data vegetation is one way to do it if we can do it right. So bring the tool to the secure environment, do the analysis in approved tool, obviously,
Mhm.
and then do the analysis and take the aggregate data out of it. Then another advantage of that approach is data without borders. I mean,
Right.
governance issue is a huge issue. You can't take the data from US and take it to, Europe, for example. It's governed by different policy. So if you don't have to take the data out of the secure environment tray or whatever, then it kind of eliminates that issue altogether. So Patty talked about digital twins, to
Mhm.
create a more secure data set, not jeopardizing privacy confidentiality, and bring the tools there and do the analysis and then take the only aggregated data, which is okay to share. So, that's the main reason I was actually interested in joining the data visitation group and doing all that. But repository is a static. It's typically don't allow the analytical tools to come there.
Right.
It's just mostly storage and long-term preservation. That's what it is. So I just wanted to throw
Mhm.
that out there.
In the US, there was a law passed years ago called the Foundations, excuse me, the Foundations of Evidence-Based Policymaking Act. And pursuant to that, there was an advisory committee on data for evidence building on which I served. And we came out with all these recommendations, and one of which was to assess whether the United States should have a national secure data service. And the advisory committee said, yes, we should pursue this. And so the National Science Foundation has been spending, I don't know, like $9 million a year through the CHIPS and Science Act in order to do demonstration projects about a national secure data service. And to address the issue that you just raised, they invested in the R&D for something called SCET, Secure Compute Environment Testbed. And that is where you would be able to bring the tools to interact with very sensitive data, potentially from all around government. And for that to actually function, you need plumbing, you need metadata, you need money, you need things that we don't currently have. But if you look at, and this is something that I will add to the notes when I am not sharing screen, uh, but you can look at the America's Data Hub. They have a list of all of these projects that have been funded, and they are likely to fund more next year, um, that are looking into the development of synthetic data and privacy preserving record linkage and trying to solve all of these individual problems, but it is yet unclear how those would come together as something that is a service providing organization that could even assist NIH and NIH grantees in the future. So that is another piece of the moving policy landscape in the States. All right. Uh, if it's
Patty's
okay,
here.
please.
Oh, I just want to add one more thing. So Patty
Yes.
shared our Zenodo article, Geography of Trust. So we actually compare federated system, data visitation, central data visitation. So federated system is kind of like a tray where you allow, secure tools and everything.
Mhm.
Actually, like NCI. I mean, they have a data commons where they actually allow the secure environment where they can use the tools they provide, not the tools you're going to bring,
Right.
kind of thing. So it's kind of federated system is kind of like a tray you're talking about in a way, but it does require a lot of money to support this system, right? So
Mhm.
unless you get funding, it's a federally funded, it's hard to maintain this system at the institution level in a way. We do have some kind of secure environment where they can, like HPC or data lake, where they have our internal data along with the tools they can use. But I don't know for sure if it actually qualifies as a tray, what kind of security system is involved, because it's internal. We're
Right.
not, allowing external people to access. It's internally, it's more secure, right? So
Yeah.
I think it has a different standards in a way.
I think that's a good segue. I mentioned it before, and I'm going to keep stressing it. I am a recent replacement to Martin Weiss, from University in Vienna, who has left the university and taken a job, uh, having finished his degree. and he was the original coordinator for the Blueprint subgroup. And so I was a member of the subgroup. I am now the coordinator of the subgroup. So be gentle with me. But I do want to tell you a little bit about what the subgroup was aiming to do. It was trying to create an inventory. And if you had one, we wanted you to share your documentation so that we could see how it compares to the others that we know about. And there are a bunch of these globally. And I will admit that partially because of the transition between me and Martin, we haven't had like regular meetings to draw that information out. And so we're going to be focusing on that as we continue our work later into 2026. But we really wanted to get a shared understanding of these global projects. And
Can I
Renee,
ask a question
please,
about? Hi.
yes.
You mentioned Vienna, and my first encounter with data visitation was with Andy Rauber.
Yes, he is one of our
Oh,
co-chairs.
so I met him in Seoul, and he had the lecture about data visitation and the RDA group, and since then, for me, data visitation is like a well-formed SQL. You know, that's how I conceptualize. And for me, you can call it digital twin or synthetic data or whatever. Still, it's a matter of how do you form the SQL, request. So
Right.
can you help me and, consolidate the context?
I hope that my next couple of slides may do that, but let me see. Okay. This is what we were aiming to do. And I think that a lot of these boxes in the center are what you are seeking. I am sad to inform you that we do not have solutions for all of those boxes in the center, but we are still working on them. Uh, Part of it, like I said, if you have a TRE, if you have a way that you are allowing data visitation, what are those components? Like, show me the diagram. That's like the starting point, and then start to unpack the processes by which data are populated in the catalog or by which requests are submitted and managed and vetted and revised and resubmitted as necessary. And importantly, what are the roles that you have working on that diagram? And what mechanisms, oh my God, I have a typo there. What mechanisms do you have to govern these things? And that's the one of the places that I'm like, what is going to happen with AI? And then when you look at the entire thing, where those boundaries are, where there is a trusted space and you have that wall where there are people that aren't. And so our goal was to explore all of these things and come up with some recommendations later this year. I will probably come back to these US examples, but this is what Andy and Martin had as their original diagram, and I have enhanced it by adding little Claude icons all over it, where I am afraid that people are going to be like, I can do this better and faster with AI. And they might be right, but I need them to pursue all of the potential consequences because the way that a data owner interacts and uploads and feeds a repository, you could plug in AI. And the analyst might actually be AI. And on the inside of the machine, the way that you're handling the ingest and those SQL queries that you were just talking about could be optimized with AI, right? And your point is like, I don't even have AI right now. Could someone just tell me how I do that, how I set this up? And there are multiple papers that the working group has that I have links to at the end of the slides that can point you to where we think it is fruitful, that follow this sort of an architecture. And we're trying to get that community so that you could get in there and find the setup that is most similar to what you have and that we can actually work together to help each other. Because some of the contacts that I have in the US, like the state of Texas is very different than the state of Connecticut. Like there is a population difference, like a huge magnitude, and the number of schools and the number of students. But it is under that, it is the same type of data you want to protect. If you're talking about secondary school pupils, it has the same federal law. You might have differences in state law, but like we want to talk about the mechanisms and the environment and let the governance handle those similar or dissimilar legal requirements that they operate within. Um, but you can see that like the original threat model didn't, as Lars pointed out, in my opinion, adequately consider what AI could do because it used to be hard and expensive. And now it's just cheaper, but it's not more transparent. I don't think I gave you a good answer, but I'm telling you
No,
that there's a community that can.
it's a great answer, and it leads to the other issue that the safety mechanism, or however we call them, should be part of the system.
Mhm.
It could be another AI in the system. I mean, we must trust the machine. We can't rely only on the human in the loop.
Right. Lars?
Yeah. Just a short question about this current model that we're looking at. I see that the AAI, the authentication and authorization infrastructures, basically have no attack vectors. They're not connected, so they're not part of the system, which I think is very strange, because I think that one of the things that we know, because we've tested, we know that for many of these systems, the current ways that you do this through time top, for example, they are vulnerable to attacks.
Right.
And you have their threat vectors that are direct and would go towards the actual authorization and pretend. And
Right.
especially, I think, when we're talking about accelerated attacks through AI and autonomous networks, even if these are not attacks that we intend, I
Mhm.
think the authorization and authentication part will actually be an integral part into how these will try and inject or circumvent these parts
Right.
in different ways, so that because if an autonomous system don't have access but they need access, then they will try another vector, right? So they will
Right.
go for another vector of attack. So I think it's needed to think about a little bit about those and how those threats materialize in modern times. Um, yeah, really interesting thought about this, like from you on also on the SQL kind of thinking, because this is one of the major threats, I think, with the unintentional injection attacks.
Yep.
Um, so that's was just what I was just wondering about this part of that, like why it's not part connected, if it's intentional or if it was just not
So this
working.
is, I'm still on the first part of the project, which is
Yeah.
blueprints. And I will get to the part that Via is working on about risks.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I think it is more squarely in his part of the project. And I can get to that in a second. But before I do, I had mentioned these, and I'm happy to just put a pin in this. And if there is interest in learning more about some of these specific US examples, I can get to them. But since our conversation has been more about kind of the nuts and bolts of doing this, I am happy to come back and discuss these, but I do want to make sure that we get to these other parts of the other subgroups. So the one I just mentioned, again, is called Blueprints. we're trying to get an inventory of TREs. And once we have the inventory, we want to compare and contrast in order to look at similarities in the architectures they're using. So that's that one piece. Adjacent to that, Rob Baxter in the UK actually has this standard architecture. And this is the paper that I was mentioning that I'd encourage you to look at. They are continuing to work on this. They are applying it in different projects around the UK. Uh, and this is something where one of their demonstrations was going to be seeing if you can have interoperability between one of the sites, a TRE in the UK and a TRE in another EU country, right? And in the US, and I'm like, God, I could do that across states because that's the problem space that we have. Uh, but you can see that Rob still would like community input on the federation models. It sounds like it would be great for us to have more conversation with your data visiting work group that I will admit I was not aware of, and I am excited to know that it is there. And to talk through these trust mechanisms. Lars, I think this is what you were just speaking to, but there's so much more that we can unpack, I'm sure. And also the acknowledgement that we probably need better ways of uh, understanding the legal frameworks that would affect the data sources that you are using. It's one thing if you're talking about the EU, but if you're in the US, there are different standards, whether it is health data or education data or tax data from our revenue agency, even census data from the Census Bureau. Those are all collected under different authorities and have different legal frameworks in terms of access, who authorized users are, and the penalties for misuse. So just riffing on those few things that he is looking for. This was the plan for Rob's group. They wanted to come up with this baseline so that we could talk about common security and operational standards. And so that's that paper that was referenced on the previous slide. And then the goal, since these exist all around the world, would be to figure out how to have a secure mesh between them. That assumes, of course, that you can get over the legal constraints about who can use data or see the data. Uh, but it is not assuming that you're going to solve simultaneously across the entire network of TREs because there are so many permissions that are going to be specific to each project. So it needs that governance console as well, but we want to be talking about the standards that would enable this sort of thing. So in addition to that, they wanted to be pursuing project-specific tools and software approaches to make this work. And so if you had a couple of TREs willing to try this, what would it take? And how would you be able to make sure that the agreed upon work can occur without unauthorized access, without any data leakage? And do we have those tools, or like where could you even test such a thing? And once you have that set up, what software would you need to actually do the analysis inside of there? And I think we've touched on that in our conversation so far, the needs for these things. But this was a work group that was exploring these issues. Is that,
So I have a quick question.
please? Yeah.
So I shared the security assessment template actually, Lars and Patty developed as a part of AIDV workgroup output. And the more I listen to you, it sounds like there's an interoperability issue between trays, maybe can be solved if you have a
That'd be
standardized
great.
security template, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Let me show you more of Rob's handiwork here. These were some of the models that they were considering. These are somewhat high level. I am curious how many of these you guys have already explored or have broader solutions for. I think my main action is to follow up with you after, well, one, to read your materials and then follow up with you and get our groups learning.
I do see a lot of synergy. You
Yeah.
see how many AIDB work group members are here? That tells you something. So definitely there's some overlapping interests. We should work together and
That would be
definitely,
wonderful.
take a look at that security template, he developed, Patty and Lars and a couple other people. Yeah.
Sure. I think that all of these models are used in the most currently when people are working with sensitive data in theories. I think you see all of these things that Rob has back, and I think it changes depending on project actually,
Yeah.
because I don't think it's on a theory basis. I think it's on a project to project basis, because we see that in the environment that I work in Sweden, we see sometimes we have researchers collaborating with US and US and data from NIH and other places, and then they would have one type of agreement that needs some of them needs a lot of signing off that we normally don't have, and then we have others that are working together with our neighboring countries in the Nordics, which are significantly less and lower sort of injection parts. One of the interesting things when you're working with these systems is even though we can have different interoperability models, one thing that is currently very common is that you still need to send some documentation that you're human.
Yeah.
And that is something that can be very complicated when we're talking on these different types of interoperability that you halter on that actually interoperability between the documentation on how do I prove that I am human or that I am authorized by human in some manner. Because currently, of course, we have many different standards of showing these documentations, right? And what constitutes a proof of
Humanity.
humanity, yeah, which I think is these are the things that I think solve problems that we need to solve to even get these interoperability models to fly, is to find the ways to harmonize these type of documents that kind of lie in along all of these levels, no matter which level you're at.
Yeah. Your comments remind me of efforts that in the US, DARPA, Defense Advanced Research, okay, that the former head of DARPA had a project to try to come up with a TEE, trusted execution environment, where the researchers would not see the data. And so it had a very sophisticated federated data model because you were basically you were trusting a chipset to enforce the security here. And I worked with them to socialize the idea largely around social scientists because I'm an economist by training. And they were like, no, no, I do not want to submit a query and get an answer. I decline. And so it's when you think about the ways that you would be able to take advantage of great new giant stores of data, uh, a lot of those data controllers don't want somebody poking around at a terminal, you know? And so it's really like, what is the sea change in research going to be if some of the data controlling organizations move toward secure query systems as opposed to an enclave where you are either able to virtually or physically sit at the console and, type at a keyboard and iterate on your responses. So I'm also aware of that. I've actually co-developed a project with IRS where they are going to run a secure query system because people are so eager to get earnings outcomes, they are willing to forego exposure to the microdata. But that is typically government agencies and nonprofits, not necessarily academics. So,
I posted a link to SweGen, the SweFrag at SweGen, which is actually exactly that. It is a um, data set that lives on an HPC system in Sweden, and anyone can come in and have access to the macro data through secure queries that goes directly towards the raw data, but all that is presented is frequencies, and it's actually gated to check that if you get too few samples, for example, it will hide that information and things like that. So that is a good example of how that can work in practice today.
we are, because of the sensitivity and the US cultural sensitivity around income, we are using differential privacy instead of just suppression on those output statistics, because then IRS can say, there's a formally private guarantee that they are not releasing information that could uniquely identify one of the taxpayers. So happy to talk about that as well. Seon-Young?
Yeah, so I'm gonna suggest a solution and then on top of it, problem again. Let's start with the solution first. So, a lot of times to circumvent this issue, the accessibility to, a highly sensitive data, we are looking into like a synthetic data, basically, like an MD clone
Yep.
or digital twins, right? So you kind of sterilize the data or anonymize data so you don't have to worry about all this confidentiality issue, right?
Right.
So that's great in one hand, but the problem nowadays is AI is getting so good at re-identifying.
Right.
So in one hand, yeah, that solves the problem, but then AI is just so good at re-identifying by piecing together from massive data they have. How do we prevent that? So like okay, it's great we can create digital twins and synthetic data, so we can do the analysis, but then AI is kind of catching up and then kind of even jeopardize that route. So
Yeah.
what do we do?
So there was a great paper pretty recently about using an LLM to re-identify. I will stick that in the notes when I can. And then also, NIST did a comparison of different widely used synthetic data generator packages, many open source, and had really interesting results if you haven't seen that. And there's also the opportunity to use AI through diffusion models to create the synthetic data. Um, and our colleagues in the UK are doing something called SynthSprint, that I can send a link to as well, for people that are, curious about how you go about making synthetic data. But to your point, the synthetic data is the first part of it. You need to make sure that it is obscuring the underlying data, but then you have to be considering whether it is fit for purpose. And if it's just for somebody to test code that is then going to have the opportunity to run the data on a validation server, it can be really not messy, but it can be very imprecise. I was aware of folks at NIH that were doing the NC3 program, the COVID collaborative, and they wanted to create synthetic data that was good enough to use, but it was going to be unsafe, and
No.
so please, Roni.
I can't understand how synthetic data can work when you use it for big data analysis. The whole idea is the fine resolution that
Right.
it doesn't work. But this table is fascinating. I'm looking at it and I think of like government ministries, different ministries. And let's say that I'm a researcher. I want to access data about the same population, same people from
Mhm.
different ministries. And the structure, the interoperability model can vary. It can be either or some of these models.
Mhm.
But how do I connect, verify that this is the same person?
Right.
We're talking about sensitive data, sensitive big government data. So how I can see how it solves the government issues and privacy and not privacy, big data, but what about the sensitivity? I mean, I want to make sure that this is the same person all over,
Mhm.
but I don't want to violate the privacy.
Right. Uh, so I do a fair amount of work in this space with privacy preserving record linkage and secure multi-party computation. And there are some solutions where, especially if you have a unique uh, and high quality government identifier, like a social insurance number in the US, it would be a social security number. Then doing various forms of secure hashing and then doing the join on that, you could have a reasonably high confidence that you have the same entity across files. However, in the US, we don't have social security numbers in an awful lot of the files that we care about. And so we're left to probabilistic matching that relies on name and date of birth and location. And so some of these are attribute, like some of them are identifiers, like the combination of my date of birth, name, and address. That could identify me, but mostly these are attributes like that can change over time, like my cell phone number or my address. And so doing that on hash data is very dicey. And so this is a problem of who is allowed to use what data in what way and the manner in which you do that linkage on different components of it. Um, there's a bunch of us working on that because it's the only way that we are able to link people from education through post-secondary into their career outcomes, because you don't have a unique identifier across those three data systems. So some of the enclaves in the US exist to deal with that. And what happens that there is a trusted third party running that enclave that has exposure to all of that data in the clear so they can do linkages to have that confidence.
Yeah, so that's the cooperative part. Okay, thank you.
This is another slide that points out Rob's magnificent work on the standard architecture. Again, I will make sure these slides get out there, but they are continuing to develop this paper. And I want to make sure that we have time to get to, we've talked about a lot of this, although I'll pause. No, I guess we haven't talked about these. These were some of Rob's questions. Um, who is thinking about the rules of engagement for data visiting? This gets back to a five safes concept of who is a safe person that will interact with safe data in a safe project in a safe setting. Um, how you have standards for who is allowed and who isn't, and how frequently that is validated. In the US, the Federal Statistical RDC, the Research Data Center Network, they just imposed continuous vetting. And we're like, what does that mean? Like, how continuous are you going to be doing the vetting? And it sounds like they're going to do it every 5 years, but if somebody is a trusted user, how often should they be vetted again? Um, And what is the form of reciprocity that would work even across domains? Because I imagine in the States, you could be uh, given special permission to health data that would carry no water for education data access. I'll just run through all these questions and you guys can riff on whichever ones you want. The second one, and this gets something I think, Lars, that maybe you had brought up before with the AAI box on the slide. What are we thinking we need in terms of the standardized central services that are going to help with actually operating a TRE? And then finally, at the bottom there, what would a transparency layer include? And that means if you are country A, what information would you need to know or have updated regularly? Perhaps even like a console that gives you updates in real time. Uh, and what would country B need? And like what does that form of transparency look like, especially in this interoperability segment of our project, where we're thinking about doing it across TREs? And then we'll get to risks, I swear. Yes, please.
Feels like I'm talking quite a lot here. I don't want
It's
to
great.
monopolize the session, of course, but I mean, yeah, for you were saying about like how often do you need to vet? I would say if you look at it from an ethical perspective, anytime you make a new access to a set of data, you need to be vetted, right? Because if you're not, if you can't prove that you're still, at least can't prove that you're still trustworthy, how can you be given access to that data? And also that new access may come with other reliabilities, right, or risks. So that could easily be that in the first case, you're perfectly fine at the certain level, you're vetted to a given level and said that this is okay, your access at this point is good. But then you ask to access that same data, but for a different purpose. And then that might have a very much higher need of like requirements set on you as a accessor. So I think the answer is every 5 years would be far too seldom,
Yeah.
because it would vary, I say. Um,
I
the
have a project in the restricted data lab and it had a 60-month duration. I think I'm probably in year 2 or year 3 of it. Um, but I think that there could be greater use of administrative, like this administration cares what countries I visit. And if they wanted to pull my access because I visited some unfriendly country to them, that would be sad, but their discretion. But also if somebody has when you get your initial clearance, they do a credit check. And so if you found out that I had had some great change in my circumstances and my credit score had plummeted 400 points, you may view me as more of a threat of exfiltrating some of the information in there, which the project I'm on includes quarterly wage data, you know. Um, so yes, I agree with you that
and on that note, I have a really sort of a interesting segue there, and how different this, and this is why I always from the beginning have said that context matters, because for example in Sweden, wage data is not sensitive or private. For a public person like myself who works for a university, I work for government, my data is actually public.
Mhm.
So everyone has a right to know exactly to the
Right.
Swedish krona how much I earn and how much I have in side incomes and how much anything I have, uh, because I'm working in a governmental organization, and all of that information must be shared.
Mhm.
It's not even a so we don't even have, like, it's not even considered private or sensitive, or like no one would react strangely if you got all the wage data for every university in Sweden. That's, thousands of people,
Yeah.
which is large for Sweden since we're not that many people.
Hopefully not for like a private citizens though. Yeah, in the
Yeah,
US, the
that's a
same
part.
thing.
Yeah,
Like even
yeah,
the private citizens.
yeah. Anyone, like, if you're working for the government in any form or way, except if you are inside the police
Oh,
or
security.
military, because then you get classified. Your information is classified as a person because it could be a threat if someone knows things about you. But yeah, and then there we have the other part, which is aggregate data, right? That you talked about earlier, and what we call backwards identification here.
Mhm.
Right.
And I
But I
mean,
mean,
this is
yeah,
always an issue for us. We can share data that we think
safe,
is safe,
but yeah,
but especially in the role of the agentic,
right. They're
uh,
so good at putting
it
pieces
easily,
together.
yeah, they could easily pull from several different spaces and
Mm,
infer the
right.
data that you think is sort of safe from that. Uh, yeah,
I like to joke that the TV show Survivor in the
yeah,
US, uh, one of the winners was named Amy O'Hara, and I am
right,
not her.
yeah,
And I joked before that, like, we're both white women in the US. Like, if we happen to live in the same state, someone could potentially, match us to the same record. But in this day of, send an agent, they would very quickly figure out that, like, the data person economist is not the survival person in any way, shape, or form. I would lose in like 4 minutes. I would be like, that's it. I need a hotel. Um, but yeah, the just the volume of information there is so different.
Fun fact, that's a Swedish export, by the way.
Well done.
So Survivor, that I don't know if we should be that proud of it, but yeah, that the game show was actually first created in Sweden many years back.
That's
Um, um, yeah. Anyway, and then we were talking about things like centralized services and transparency layers. I think these are very complicated questions that,
yeah.
as of yet, is difficult to find good answers to. Um, we don't really have a standard way of talking to each other yet on
Right.
these kind of questions, which is a big problem because we don't know what we can trust on those layers, like on the transparency layer.
Right.
We don't know, is my information from Sweden, is that really trustworthy compared to someone who is in the US or someone who is in Israel or someone who is in any of all the countries that we are all from here. We have so many just
Right.
in the room, and I think
Now
it's
we're getting into the data without borders category,
yeah,
right? That's what we're pursuing. It's really hard
Luckily,
to, right.
the financial sector is relatively
Didn't
organized,
say that.
so it, it
Have
can
you
work.
seen the work being done on fraud detection using various privacy enhancing technologies in the SWIFT network? Like they are layering the secure hashing, the secure multi-party computation, and differential privacy. Like they are doing the full suite, and they have the money and the interest to do it because of what is at risk. And do we have something that is like that much of a financial risk that people are like, wow, we should really figure out how to solve some of these problems? Because when great gobs of money are at stake, I'm with you, Ronit. They are there to solve it.
Yes, but thanks to tax treaties and police treaties and all these regulators, I think that there is to some level, there is a coordination.
Mhm. I'll see if I can find the paper because I think that very few
I'll,
things shock me, but that shocked me at how well they coordinated across borders.
I'll be really happy to see all the papers you mentioned before.
I will get them in there. Okay. I am going to click through and uh, this is the work that VA is working on, the risk subgroup, and they have this framework established, but they want more people to populate it with them. And you can see they've got a very ambitious set of deliverables there. Uh, and let me click through to show you. This is the problem as they had framed it, and then you will have a link to their working document that has that framework in it. But they recognize that there's no catalog of these risks, and so it's difficult for people thinking of TREs in different contexts and different locations to even weigh different solutions and figure out what their acceptance criteria could or should be, you know? And so they're trying to work on that problem. And then this was their plan. It's kind of a bit of a restatement of what was on that previous slide. They want a catalog of the threat models and the black hat scenarios. And this is at the infrastructure level, not necessarily the project level. Okay. So again, this is the TRE working group. And so we're like, how would the TRE be vulnerable? Not just like Amy is going to try to exfiltrate that wage data she referred to. Um, they want to try to get a collection of the security levels that are currently in place in different TREs and whether people have tools that they are finding successful at assessing these risks and threats that they face. They want to identify and share out the practices that people are using to lower the risks of using sensitive data. They want to collect the worst case scenarios. This is like not the uplifting part of the working group, I will say, but it is an incredibly necessary part of the working group. And this is not unique to TREs either. This is something that everybody that is talking about improving access to restricted data, we don't spend enough time on this, in my opinion. And then ultimately, they want to come up with a set of data sharing conditions that you could encourage people to use and also explore that balance between usability and security, because it can't all be lock it down or make it nearly impossible to get access to. So that's their plan. Um, these are some examples of common threats that their team is looking into. So you can like start getting from the previous slide was like in the abstract, what do we want to do? And here is where they're like, okay, let's make a list and let's define it. And so when you click through to their working paper, you will see that these are some of the definitions that then they want to unpack. And they have examples here so that you could see maybe where experiences that you've had could fit in to make this risk catalog, if that makes sense. Okay. And they are also thinking of, again, this is about the infrastructure, but what are the environment specific threats that if you have a TRE that is federated or a TRE that is potentially open to these MPC servers, you know, what are what are the threats there at that environment level? And then how do you start to categorize them? Again, can you do a qualitative or a quantitative assessment as to what the likelihood of that threat turning into a vulnerability and a risk, how that fits in there. So this is what they are working on. Wait, I can pause there because I didn't have anything. Basically, they want people to come in and add their risks. And I would encourage you to go into their document. And there's also a link that we have if you want to be part of the blueprint conversation, the interoperability conversation, or the risk conversation. And it's not an or, you can belong to all three and be part of the entire fun journey that I'm describing. But this is kind of a summary of that, that we want to have back from blueprints this big directory of where are the TREs. And we want to have people consider how they could use a TRE. We want to lower the barrier to access. And then priority two was the one Rob's doing and trying to think about how you could have collaboration across existing or future TREs. And then the third one, it is coming up with these threat scenarios and mitigation strategies based on real experiences, not necessarily let's sit back and think of something that is possible but has a very low probability of occurring. It's good to have those on there, but we really want to focus on things that are kind of real current challenges and threats.
Quick question for you. So
Please.
is a threat ID is actually persistent unique identifier like a DOI?
I don't think they're that far yet, but that would be like an ambitious way to think of it. I mean, but when you said that, I was like, there are people that are coming up with the index of noise added through differential privacy applications. And they are like, we shall make an index of this. And I'm like, okay, well, is each one going to have an ID? And are we going to be able to reference it? Similar to your question. Like, I think that we need to have that ambition, but in the short run, we're just looking to populate the
Mm-hmm.
list.
So there's just a list of a threat ID somewhere, like a registry database.
Mhm.
Okay.
It's super
I would like to.
relevant
I would
for
like to look at it. What is the metadata standard for threat ID, for example?
Mm. If it is not to your liking, I'm sure they would take any suggestions you have, because right now I am guessing it is a sequence number, but I could be wrong. Ronit, I interrupted you, sorry.
just it's super relevant to some of the projects going on. So I'll be happy to join whatever and to read the material.
That would be great. So I was going to ask, I just don't think there was much awareness of our group or what it was doing. And so I think people didn't know that we had wikis. I don't think they knew we had some of these documents. And I assume that a lack of awareness probably contributes greatly to people not contributing. We are also eager to understand what resources would be valuable. You know that we are going to be in a series of, we've got a couple of months until our recommendations are due for the way that this working group was set up. And I don't think the recommendations are likely what you guys are looking for. I think that you would like to see the list of risks. And Lars, I would love to have you weigh in on where there are shortcomings in the way that we're currently describing. And also, I'd love to get more conversation on where you think that AI and other opportunity/threats factor in.
Yeah, for sure. And I also think it's important that we like when we come into this risk talk and when we come into these different types of like sort of what is blocking and things like that, I think it's important to think about the fact that this is not a problem, this is an opportunity. We have opportunities to build more ethical ways of accessing data, more shareable ways, and more secure ways to keep data as we talked in an earlier session on where we talked about the risks of data loss in this geopolitical
Yeah.
environments that we are in now, because there are many places where data is being destroyed and or other parts. So I think we can look at it these as this sharing of data between TREs across national borders can actually be a way of generating more security rather than less. If we start to think about it less in a national sovereignty perspective, but on security for the individual.
Mhm.
Here's where I like that the EU's idea around data controller rather than data owner.
Yep.
We don't talk about data owners because the data owner is always the subject,
Mhm.
right? The person that actually has the life, that is the person that is the data owner. Uh, and what we talk about is data controller, which is the person who holds the data and what responsibilities they have rather than. And I think that that is a good concept to think about, to keep that in mind.
I know I've brought us to time, and I truly appreciate your hanging with me and participating. Uh, I'm going to be putting these slides up. It has all of this information, has all the links in there. And my email is at the end, or I'm pretty easy to find because I'm not the Amy O'Hara that won Survivor. I'm the one at Georgetown. Um, and I have a big list of papers and resources that I'm also going to stick in the chat about some of these projects that may be of interest. And I am delighted to meet all of you and to join your community. And if you have any comments or feedback or ideas, please let me know. And I would love to hear from you guys.